There comes a point in self-awareness as a journey where you finally stop trying to silence the mind and instead you start to see the mind for what it actually is. The mind is movement, the mind is thoughts, and it is emotions and memories, and these things in your mind are all similar to waves, metaphorically. They're rising, they're curling, they're fading, and you're not the one commanding them, you're simply the one witnessing them. And the moment that you are able to witness, you are able to separate. And at first, that might feel like it's some sort of freedom to you. You realize that you are not your thoughts. You have to separate the thoughts from the thinker. That the stories that your mind tells you, the fears, the doubts, the projections, everything about them, they're simply noise in your head. You can observe those thoughts without drowning in them, without getting lost in them thoughts. You learn the distance between thought and the distance between the thinker. As I said before, you have to separate that thought from the thinker to finally comprehend every thought going on in your mind. And eventually you start to, you taste peace in that scene, in that mind. And it is very powerful, that first distance, the first time you separate the thought from the thinker. Suddenly you are able to say that I am not my anger, I am not my anxiety, and you can watch them like they're clouds moving through the sky. And for a while, that is enough to you. That is the start of your journey of clarity and mental cohesion, and it's more than enough to satisfy you. You are able to start living with a semi-small margin between awareness and impulse, and you stop reacting to every single voice and every single thought and every single impulsive emotion in your head as if they're all preached like they're the truth. However, once you stay in that mindset for a bit too long, for long enough, something strange starts to happen. The observer, the calm witness that you've built inside yourself, it starts to feel slightly artificial as well. And you start wondering who exactly is the person watching your entire life? Who is the one that separates the thoughts from the thinker? And what is this self in your mind that stands so far apart from everything else, all your thoughts? And that is when everything that you believe you thought about awareness starts to dissolve and kind of fall apart. Once you call a wave, you have separated the wave from the ocean. That is kind of a metaphorical way to summarize non-duality. That single act of naming, that single act of labeling and defining creates distance. It creates that defined state. And you say that that is a thought. And now there's the thinker and the thought, the observer and the observed. And there's two sides of something that was never actually split apart. You have made awareness into an identity, and it's its own new kind of ego. And it is softer and it is more spiritual, but it is still a version of an ego in your mind. Before that label, before you said there was a wave, there was simply an ocean. There was movement and there was stillness. There was depth and there was reflection. And it was all the same ocean, the same water. That is what non-duality kind of points to. Not just the separation of thoughts from the thinker, but instead the recognition that the thinker is still part of that same continuous field. The thinker is still part of life. If I didn't label my finger as my finger, it would be part of my hand. If I didn't label my hand as my hand, it would be part of my arm. If I didn't label my arm as my arm, it would be part of my body. And if I didn't label my body as my body, it would be part of life. Stoicism teaches you to control your mind. Buddhism teaches you to watch your mind. However, non-duality, the likes of Advaita, tells you that there is no your mind to control. There is simply awareness, and there is simply moving through forms and pretending to be separate from your own mind. Marcus Aurelius quotedly said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." He was describing that semi-early stage of that awareness, the wave learning to stabilize itself, learning not to be tossed around by the sea. However, at a certain depth and a certain level of reflection, even that distinction collapses. The mind and the event are both movements of the same water. There was never a border between them until you labeled them. We talk about the sky and clouds as if they're some separate entities, but where does one begin and the other one end? Where does the sky start and where does the cloud end? The sky is the cloud, the ocean is the waves, and that awareness and that personality and that inner observer are the same concept. You're the same thing. Everything, you're bundled together, you're holistic. The division simply exists because you named it and you figured it out and you labeled it. The moment that you say, this is me watching my thoughts, this is me being aware of my anger, the mind slips back into that that misinformation, or I can't say misinformation, but it slips into that mindset. The mind loves setting roles. It loves defining itself. It loves labeling things. It doesn't know how to exist without any comparison. However, true awareness, is the lack of comparison. It doesn't compare anything because it doesn't need to. It doesn't even call itself awareness. It simply is. It just exists. That is that quiet insight that the sages tried to put into words and failed every single time. Lao Tzu called it the Tao that cannot be spoken. The Buddhists called it the unconditioned, and Spinoza called it the God or nature. Every single one of them was just trying to describe what exists before that separation, before the wave figures out its name. And it's not some sort of mystical, cosmic answer. It is quite direct. Right now, your thoughts are actively happening. The sounds, the sensations, the feelings. You are not the one who creates them. They simply appear in the same way that the wind moves or the heart beats. It just happens. And the awareness, the physical awareness of them, that is not somebody watching. That is just the ocean feeling its own motion. When you call a thought yours, you create that idea of ownership. You design that fallacy in your mind. When you call it just a thought, you create the idea of detachment. And both of these things are waves. Both rise and fall. Both have crests. Both have peaks. What's beneath both is the ocean that never moves, even while moving. And it's kind of paradoxical, isn't it? You cannot truly lose yourself because you are never separate enough to be found. The entire journey, that self-discovery, that detachment, that spiritual awakening, is simply the ocean trying to see itself through ripples. And that doesn't make life meaningless. Hearing that, it might feel a bit nihilistic. However, it shouldn't make your life meaningless. Because once you are aware and once you see that same field of awareness runs through everything, there is no longer some sort of in here and out there. The thoughts that you fight and the people that you love and the pain that you hide from and all of these things, they are not intrusions in your life. They are the ocean exploring its own shape and expanding upon itself. Whenever anger arises, you can see it as the ocean folding in on itself. Whenever fear appears, that is still the ocean. It's just forming a new wave. It's forming a new peak and a new trough. You don't have to control the waves or push them away. They will rise, they will peak, they will return to stillness because that is what water does. It's so malleable that everything about it will go back to the way it is. It'll be still eventually. The real mistake is never going to be feeling too much. Instead, it's believing that the feelings are belonging to someone. The moment that you state that I am angry, you turn a natural wave into some sort of personal storm and you perpetuate that anger. However, anger is never going to be a proof of self. It is simply the sea moving through a different, certain type of rhythm. And yet what we do is we spend our entire lives trying to manage the ocean with just a bucket in our hand. We name and we measure and we divide and we say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Or I'm observing, but I'm not attached. Or I'm healing, but I'm still not healed yet. Or I'm a smoker and I'm just trying to quit. Every single label is just the wave pretending to be fully solid. The water never needed your permission to move. It still moves. The point of this, I'm saying all of this, but what is the actual point? Well, I believe that the point of this is not to just dissolve into some sort of emptiness or deny form as a whole. It is to live knowing the fact that form is temporary and substance is eternal. You can still play your role, you can still love, you can still fail, you can still build, you can still live life, but you do it knowing that the boundaries are made of water and they will return back to that still state. That is kind of where the peace hides. That's where the peace is hidden away for you to find it. And it's not in that silence or control or that fake awareness because you meditated for 5 minutes that day. But instead, it's in that collapse of distance. It's when the watcher and the watched and the self and the thought, it's when they all fold into that same awareness. And maybe that is what enlightenment means. Not some arrival at this perfect state where you're finally at your biggest wave, but just the recognition that you never left it, that you were never apart from anything. You are still a wave in the ocean, even if you're aware of that, but you're still part of that ocean, even if you feel you've left it. Even the wave that forgot it was water is still water. The thought that it believed it was separate from awareness was still its own form of awareness. The self that still thinks it's searching for unity is already unified. So yes, you must separate the thoughts from the thinker if you must, if you need to, only when it's necessary. It sometimes is a necessary illusion. A training wheel for consciousness, you might even call it. It might be something that you have to do to develop yourself as a person, to expand upon that self-awareness journey. You might have to learn to see the waves for what they actually are. But when you're ready and when you think you've gotten far enough, when you're mature enough, you must look again. You must see that separation was only ever a way for the waves and the ocean to admire its own reflection. Sorry, not the waves, just the ocean as a whole. And once you label the wave as a wave, you've just separated it from the ocean. But when the names fade, the water still remains, still whole and fully untouched. And that is what you've been all along, aware or unaware.